Wait just a couple of more seconds and then we'll start. Okay, I think we'll make a start. Good. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. A very warm welcome from the Perivoli Africa Research Center and the University of Bristol to this webinar on the PARC Partnerships Fund. My name is Isabella Aboderin. I lead PARC, and I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to join us today. And I hope that we're going to be able to not only present the fund and its elements to you, but also answer all the questions that you might have about it. I'd like to introduce the speakers that we have today with us. We have first and foremost Dr. Evelyn Gitau, who is the Director of Research Capacity Strengthening, as well as the Acting Director of Research at the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi. We have Simon Glasser from the University of Bristol, who is a Research Development Manager focusing on international research collaborations. Anna Worrall, who is a Research Assurance Accountant, and Tom Morgan, who's Head of Research Contracts. And together, we will hopefully be able to discuss and present all facets of the fund to you. The program that we have envisaged for this morning is that I'll start with some welcome and introductions, which I've just done. I will then go on to just share a little bit about the context and the aims of the call with you. And then Evelyn will share a few reflections, her reflections on the call, on its design, on the potential that she sees associated to it. Simon, Anna, and Tom in turn will then share information on different elements of the call, providing an overview of the sections that need to be filled in and so on for the application. And then we'll have quite a substantial question and answer time. We've allocated about 25 minutes just to be able to hear the questions, the queries that you might have on the call and provide answers as best as we can. So without further ado, I will turn to giving you a little bit of context and outlining the aims that we're trying to pursue with the call. I should just say that this webinar is being recorded. So should you have to drop out at some point, or should you have other colleagues who would like to have participated but weren't able to, they will be able to access the recording after the event. So, thinking about the context for this call, we really have to begin with the mission of the Perivoli Africa Research Center, which really provides the underpinning for this call and the way in which we decided to design it. Our mission is to champion transformation in Africa research and partnership to advance Africa's achievement of its own aspirations. What are our points of departure when we say this? Our points of departure are, first of all, a recognition that there are historically rooted inequities in the global research and science ecosystem. Inequities that are legacies of colonialism and that are manifest in a number of metrics, including, for example, the disproportionately low contribution of African science and African research to global scientific outputs, the singularly low number of scholars, researchers in the continent, the disadvantaging of Africa-only research in citations, for example, and then last but not least, and perhaps as a reflection of these, the low positioning of African scholars, but also African universities in international rankings. I mean, we're all aware of this. Ultimately, it's very clear that these inequities and the position of Africa currently in the global research and science ecosystem harm the continent's prospects. And it's because of this that we say that there really is a need for a systemic shift, a shift in the whole system that sees African institutions, scholars, terms, interests take their rightful place in knowledge production. Knowledge production in and for the continent, yes, but also knowledge production globally. And a shift in the complex system as a whole requires, among others, a transformation in how global North Africa research collaboration and partnerships unfold. Such international collaboration constitutes a dominant part of all the research that's being conducted in the continent. And so if the system has to change, these research relationships and partnerships between institutions in the global North and those in Africa need to be transformed as well. And specifically, the multi-layered power imbalances that are so often found in such collaboration need to be overcome. What are those power imbalances? Well, some of them we're quite familiar with because, as we all know, as many of you will know, there's been a growing debate on equitable partnerships. So imbalances in terms of setting of specific research aims or questions to be addressed by research projects, imbalances that relate to the division of labor within projects, who sets the intellectual frame, who does the field work, power imbalances in terms of access to rewards, in particular to publications. But then there are also perhaps more fundamental power imbalances, which in particular the debate on decolonization has brought to the fore or has brought into relief. One is the development frame itself, the international developed frame that so often undergirds Africa research and specifically global North Africa research collaborations. Currently, it's captured in the Sustainable Development Goals. The development frame really positions Africa as a developing region and the global North as developed or advanced, if you like. And what it implies is most of the time a unidirectional gaze from the advanced developed global North to Africa, with institutions in the global North helping Africa address its challenges through research. Rarely, if ever, is the gaze returned. So, for example, through comparative investigations of challenges that exist on both sides, or let alone is the gaze returned, where African researchers actually engage in researching challenges found in the global North. That happens very rarely, if ever. The other thing about the development frame is that it predefines an agenda, and it precludes often research priorities that do not fall within or are not captured within the internationally agreed frame, for example, of the SDGs. Another set of power imbalances arises when we look at the knowledge systems, the theories, the theorizing that underpins the collection, the interpretation, the analysis of data. For the most part, it's fair to say that in global North Africa research collaborations so far, African knowledge systems, African theories, or indeed new theorizing for the continent are not foregrounded. Instead, global Northern Western theories, perspectives, concepts are typically used to guide the collection, the analysis, the interpretation of data. The positioning of African institutions, very often as junior partners in collaborations, is another key imbalance that is salient, and it goes hand in hand with vast disparities in resourcing, in capacities, often between African institutions who are involved in collaboration and their counterparts in the global North. And then lastly, imbalances in terms of the audiences that are being targeted when research is communicated and disseminated. And typically what we see is a privileging of global or northern audiences over local audiences, often as a result or embedded in the use of language, which for the most part are languages, Western languages, English, French, rather than African languages being used for dissemination of research. So these are a set of power imbalances that we think are critical and that need to be overcome if we talk about a transformation in global North Africa research partnerships. To be sure, there are a growing number of equitable partnerships efforts, and they have made valuable contributions, and many projects are seeking to put new approaches into place and translating those into practice. But nonetheless, these partnership efforts so far do have some limitations. Our consideration is that these partnership efforts, these equitable partnerships efforts so far do not fully consider some of the fundamental power imbalances that I just referred to, and they are largely not Africa-centered. They do not position African perspectives at the heart of how relationships and collaborations are to unfold. So it's against this background that the aims of this call really are to, in the way it's designed, it's really to contribute to advancing a transformed mode of Africa research and partnerships. The specific aims are to overcome some of the fundamental power imbalances that we just spoke about in the very nature of the call, to have removed the development frame and gaze from its framing, and the positioning of African institutions, being very clear that the research that we are calling for is going to be Africa-led. And we're seeking with this call to promote research collaboration that centers the ideas of African scholars and African institutions about what needs to be investigated and why and with whom, and how fairer transformed partnership arrangements actually should look like. So as such, the call is open to applications for African researchers based at African higher education or research institutions. It is open to any project that addresses basic or applied aims that are prioritized by the applicant, and these might relate to local, to national, to sub-regional, or even continental aspirations for social progress. Projects can be empirical or theoretical in nature from any discipline or indeed across any range of disciplines. And they need to be conducted in collaboration with researchers at Bristol, because we want to start at home in embedding a different mode of doing research with Africa. And then lastly, and this is important in relation to the last point, it is open for African researchers who already have established relationships with Bristol, but also, and importantly, it's open for African researchers who do not yet have such connections. And my colleagues will outline later on how we envisage helping those of you who do not have such connections yet to forge with researchers that are relevant to your research ideas. And with that, I will stop and I will hand over to Evelyn to share some reflections on the call from the perspective of an African research institution. Evelyn, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Isabella, and thank you for that highlight, which brings out a couple of things that we continue talking about in terms of equal partnerships and the issues around the North-South relationships and what we need to think about. So I want to start off with my remarks by thinking about what we think is beneficial in terms of an equitable partnership, because I think that's what the call is trying to address, and definitely you've gotten it right in many ways. The issue around mutual learning, but defined by an equal understanding of African research, but led from the gaze from an African side, I think is really great. And then the issue around developing ways of being accountable for how we present Africa and present African research is really going to allow us to do that from a perspective from an African end, not necessarily from the imbalance that we see, because most of the research tends to be defined from a perspective of those who have the resources. And then while this particular call may not necessarily have the huge dollar amount, it allows for Africans to have greater access to financial resources to start defining their own research. So I think this is a stepping stone to greater things. And I think for me, this is really the right way to go. And then One thing that was missing in the call, but we need to think about, is looking at how we enhance some of the African research impact. And you brought about the issue around where research is disseminated. It tends to be global in the north and not necessarily local. And so I think because we are asking Africans to lead this initiatives in partnership with Bristol, the call you would want to think about is how you ensure that the impact is then driven and also being made more visible and localized. So these are some of the indicators that perhaps you want to consider as you're thinking about what success would look like. I think, as we think of a benefit of the North-South relationships, it's always the issue around shared capacity building and shared capacity and sharing resources that may not necessarily be available from one partner to the other. And by perhaps trying to shift the power imbalance in terms of leadership to the African side and not necessarily the Northern side, it allows for the Africans to pick and choose and identify the things they want to share and things that they need to get from the partnership. So the equal and shared capacity will not necessarily be coming from a defined perspective from the North, but basically from being defined from an African perspective and perhaps identifying partnerships with the Bristol researchers to get them the capacities that they would need to answer some of the questions. But on the other hand, maybe even help capacitate Bristol researchers to make some of the things that they think about in terms of Africa more relevant and think about how better to even disseminate locally and not necessarily at a global level when they're working in terms of an African context. The benefits of improved quality, cost efficiency, and productivity are things that we would hope would come out of these partnerships, because if you're sharing capacities, if you're working together to learn and exchange knowledge, you're definitely going to have better research that will address the issues from an African perspective. And because this is going to help build on some existing relationships as well as develop new relationships, I think shifting the power imbalance, as we hope that this call would do, will end up building long-term relationships and continuity to some of the research that will be started in these partnerships. And I think that's really, really important to think about. So, you closed with the issue around how we position African institutions and how we position African researchers. I think the call as framed definitely is giving that opportunity. It's giving Africans the opportunity to tell their own story, to tell it in a way that is more relevant to them. And, finally, for me, if we think about shifting the power imbalances in terms of resources, not necessarily because we can't do it wholly because the resources are not coming from an African perspective, but they are being given to Africans to run, to perhaps develop even the skills of grant management, to develop some of the research governance skills that we need to ensure that we're equal and we have equity in how we manage our own resources, is thinking about, we're not looking for equality, we're looking for equity. We're looking for equity in terms of how we perceive Africa, and we want our voice to be heard in a way that will definitely shift the gaze, as you've put it and termed it in the call. So I think it's a very good first step. Of course, you can't shift power imbalances totally when one of the partners at the table is not necessarily bringing in the financial resources, but perhaps it's to start also thinking, even as people apply, is to think about the in-kind contribution some of the African institutions are going to make in trying to deliver some of the research, and defining this very well so that it looks and it is definitely bringing the equality that is needed for partnerships to be all working at a level playing field. I'll stop there, Isabella, but I think in my perspective, this is a very good first step. It allows for the things that we've been talking about in terms of decolonizing research and decolonizing the perceptions that we have in terms of the needs for Africa in terms of research, And hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, when we're looking at the impact of the initial grants, we'll come back to say we should be scaling up because it's made the impact that we need. The voices are being heard more and dissemination is happening more at a local level, and engagement is actually better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. I think you've raised some really important points. And I just want to quickly, before we move on, just touch on some of the issues you've raised. I mean, the question about impact, absolutely. We do see this as a first step, and we intend to learn from this. We intend to gather lessons from how this has worked out, lessons to be drawn by those who will receive the grants in the end, of how they have learnt from the collaboration, from the different mode of engaging with Bristol partners. And we hope to build on that going forward to hopefully scale this kind of a call up in the future. In terms of the actual impact, you've alluded to it, but it's going to be very important that we look at the impact that the applicants themselves want to achieve. We are not imposing any impact that we want to see, but it's the impact that African applicants really want to see and really want to achieve with their project. This is what we will look for and then assess. Just briefly on the in-kind contributions, this is a very good point, Evelyn. We didn't mention that in the core guidance, but I think it's a really important issue, and I would encourage all of you who would like to apply to this fund to specify where you see the in-kind contributions from your organization or from your institution. And Simon, I'm not sure if we need to define where that can be done in the application form. Perhaps you can just either speak to that now or later when you get to your bit. But I think it's
I'll speak to it later.
Yeah, okay. All right. So with that, thank you very much again, Evelyn. Food for thought as well. But I will hand over to Simon, Anna, and Tom, who will respectively touch on different elements of the call, provide you with overviews of different elements of the call. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Isabella. Yes, so I'm just going to start sharing my screen. I have a short presentation, and I'm just going to go through some of the high-level kind of mechanics. So just bear with me a second. Can you see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay. So let me start with eligibility. So as has been touched on by Isabella, we are asking that the principal investigator of this grant is an African researcher based as an African higher education institution or research institution. We are asking that lead research organization or host organization make sure that researcher will have a contract in place that covers the duration of the award. So effectively what we're saying is we need to be sure that researcher is able to carry out the work they're proposing to do. And I think this will be something perhaps my colleague Tom will touch on, but to be clear, the grant will be a contract between the University of Bristol and that African host institution. On the Bristol side, effectively, we're saying any researcher can be the collaborator with the African principal investigator. But what we're asking you to think about is, depending on the Bristol researcher's experience, it might reflect on the exact role they take on in the project. And it might also require some thoughts about whether there may be some additional support from more senior Bristol colleagues to support early career researchers in carrying out that international collaboration. As Evelyn touched on, this isn't the largest pot of money. I'll talk a little bit about funding on the next slide, but we are flexible about having additional partners. So there's more details in the guidance, but I guess the simple high level thing to point out is that partners based in Africa can ask for some funds to participate. Those from the UK cannot, so they would need to provide their resources in kind. So we're not expecting large consortium bids because the core really isn't designed for that. But if necessary to carry out your research, do bear in mind that you can bring in other partners. So the core budget is £200,000 in total, and we think we will fund approximately 3 to 5 awards. So that gives some idea about the potential cost per project, but we're not giving a precise upper limit for that for each award. It's up to you to propose what you'd like to do, but I would just caution that if you are asking for a significant request, you really will need to make an outstanding value for money case and be offering something above and beyond what more, let's say, average costed projects are offering. And I think it's also worth noting that the aims of this scheme can equally be met by lower value bids. So please consider that too. Projects can last up to 12 months, and we're expecting them to start in spring 2022. I'll leave my colleague Anna to say a little bit more about the costs, but just as a top level, to point out that Africa-based costs will be funded at 100% of the direct costs, and we will provide overheads up to value of 20% of the staff costs for this particular call. For UK costs, so Bristol costs, partners, we will support 100% of the direct costs. So the application and assessment process. On the left-hand side there, you'll see some dates. I'll talk a little bit about the brokerage service in a moment, but just to say that there's a deadline to get those in, the forms in by the 8th of October, and the service will end on the 22nd of October. We've got the deadline on the 7th of January, which I realise isn't the greatest time of year, so apologies for that. And do bear in mind that the University of Bristol's closed between the 23rd of December and the 5th of January. So I think what I would say there is, please do get in touch with us before Christmas with any serious questions or concerns you have, so that we can help you develop your applications, because you won't have much time, and we won't have much time after Christmas. We will hold a panel at the end of January, and we'll get outcomes out to you as soon as we can after that. The review process, we are lucky to have a really good international panel of Africa and Bristol-based academics. The review panel will be chaired by our Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research. And the process will be that we will receive and check the applications for eligibility. We'll send on the eligible applications for the panel to review. They will then rank. We will then create a preliminary ranking. Then all the applications will be discussed at the panel meeting. And a final rank list will be provided to our funder, our charitable donations team, for final approval. So picking up on Isabella's point, or a point of emphasis around the fact that we are happy to receive applications from both existing partnerships between Bristol and African researchers, but we're also keen and welcome applications from researchers who don't yet have a connection to Bristol. So the way we want to do this is, we'll provide you with this form. There's a link there. It's a link in the guidance. It's on the core page. We'd ask you to complete that form. That gives us a range of information to help us broker relationships. It also asks you to look for yourselves on the Bristol website to find researchers. It may not be possible, that's okay, but I would just urge you to try to find some links, because you will be in the best position to identify people in your precise area. We won't be subject area experts in all the areas across the university. So the deadline for getting those forms in is the 8th of October. We will then try to, we will approach the Bristol researchers to see if they are interested in linking up with you. And if so, we will put you in touch, and we will get back to you by the 22nd of October to carry that out. The reason we've given a deadline of the 22nd of October, it's not completely arbitrary. We feel that if you're creating a new partnership, you will need a certain amount of time to explore your project ideas, connect up the support staff between the Bristol and your university, and really that only gives you about 2 months, a little bit over 2 months to develop the application. So we feel that that's probably the sort of minimum amount of time you need to put in a high quality application. It may be possible for you to connect independently with people outside of the brokerage service, and if you want to do that, that's fine. But this kind of formal process that we're running will end on the 22nd of October. So just to quickly zoom through the application guidance, essentially it's a pro forma and then a series of attachments, so quite like any sort of generic application. All I'll do here is touch on the in-kind contribution. So actually, we are asking for a letter of support, one from the host institution and from any project partners. The guidance we've created in the application guidance does talk about what information, gives you an idea of what you need to put in those letters. And within that guidance, it does talk about in-kind support. So that's where you can really help your application and bolster it by putting in a very full and supportive letter detailing how your institution will support the project. Okay, so just some really, I guess, simple thoughts on completing the application. Hopefully, our guidance and application form provide the information on what we're looking for from you. So really do please take a careful look at that. And if there's anything that isn't clear, let us know. It's important that whether or not you may have a great research idea, it needs to meet the aims of the call. So as with any call, do make sure that what you're proposing reflects the aims of the call. And just to touch on that a little further, in terms of what we're calling the partnership mode, it may be that some people might not know exactly what we're looking for there. So I guess I just wanted to say that in terms of completing the application form, what we want to know from you is an outline of the kinds of power imbalances or inequities that you're concerned about and that you want to actively redress in your proposed project. So we'll want an outline of how your project will address them. That could be how you've designed your project to address those imbalances, for example, through the project's aims, or the partnership and collaboration arrangement, or the approaches to data collection or analysis or so on. And we're very happy to, again, talk to you about that. And I should point out that the partnership inquiry form also asks you to give a little sense of what you think those might be. And that would be helpful for you to include that in that form. Okay, so, my final slide, just to reiterate, contact us, speak to us. We're here, very happy to help with any inquiries, so please do get in touch. Okay, I will end my slideshow and I'll hand over to Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Before you come on, Anna, I just wanted to encourage all of you. I'm sure, or I could imagine that by now you have quite a number of questions. So please do start logging your questions in the Q&A space. And when we get to the Q&A part of this webinar, we will go through the questions that you've posted. So please start posting your questions. So thanks again, Simon, and over to you, Anna.
Hi, everyone. Simon, I think you're still sharing your screen. Would you be able to? Oh, actually, I can stop it. Sorry, hold on. There we go. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
you.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kind of finance and due diligence side of things for the application, and just kind of go through some of the key things from a sort of costing perspective that you might want to think about. So the funding available for the Africa-based costs, all direct costs are funded at 100%. And so that will include all staff costs, and that can be kind of the research side of things, but also administrative as well can be included. Travel and expenses and equipment, any equipment that you need, but that can be no more than 20% of the entire budget. And any other costs that are relevant to the project, and then overheads, as Simon touched on, can be up to 20% of the staff costs. And a couple of things to note. So one thing, payment will be made in GBP. So something that you might want to think about is if your bank will charge you to receive any money in GBP, then you please include that in the costing, because that will be an eligible cost. And for the Africa-based costs, the budget will be submitted. There's a budget form, Annex 1 budget form, that will be submitted as part of the application. And please provide as much detail as possible to support your costs. So they must be project specific and auditable. So please don't include any contingency costs or kind of miscellaneous costs, but please include all project related costs, so really think about what costs you can include. And all expenditure must take place before the end date of the project. So that's all, the activity needs to take place before the end of the project. And depending on the specifics of your application, a due diligence process may be required before we can make an award, but we will be in touch if we require anything further once you've submitted your application. And then just a quick bit about the UK-based costs. So direct costs will be funded at 100%, and that includes DA staff costs if they're essential for the work, but we won't be funding any estates or indirects. And please complete a work tribe costing for your costing, and then submit it as Annex 2 with the application, and detail the costs in the justification of resources. And again, please provide as much detail as possible, and all costs must be project specific and auditable, and all expenditure must take place before the end of the project. So I think we'll have some Q&A at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. Thank you. I'll hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Anna. I don't have any slides to share, and I just wanted to very quickly run through how the contracts for this would work. So there is a template contract that's available on the call website. We wanted to put that up in advance so that people could see it and highlight any issues that they had with it. We were very keen to make sure that it reflected the spirit of the call and that it was as equitable as possible. So you'll see in that template, it has two sections. The first section is about the award, so the award of funding, and then the second half is about the collaboration between the parties. We'd like to stick as close as possible to that, so we don't want to make any last minute changes on our side, and if people are happy with those terms, then we'd rather not change them. But we do recognise that there may need to be some changes to those terms, maybe because of the type of project that's being undertaken, or maybe there's something that just doesn't really work for the project. So that is possible. It's not kind of take it or leave it. The contracts have been drafted using, as far as possible, plain language. So we're trying to keep it quite short. It's between sort of 4 to 6 pages in quite big font, not just made it small font to get the page count lower. And yeah, I just want to kind of highlight that the reason why we've made it visible now is so that it's transparent and so that people can enter into it knowing what the terms will be. And if there are any issues, then please do kind of flag those or questions. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much. So now I think we have space, about 20 minutes, to answer all the questions that you might have about the call. So we have already had some postings in the Q&A space, but please keep your questions coming and we will start responding to them now. So we did have a first question that was actually submitted prior to the webinar, which was about a question around whether or not we will be able to accommodate French speakers or projects that will be conducted in French. And the answer here is that yes, we would be able to do that, provided, of course, that the partner that you end up working with at the University of Bristol is Francophone also and is able to participate in a Francophone project. So that's one. Then we've had a couple of questions, I guess for you, Tom. For you, Tom or Anna, I think, Tom, you. The question is, if the PI does not already have a contract with his or her institution in Africa, will a written promise from the higher education institution to provide one be accepted? Would that be acceptable? And then an add-on to that, if the written promise is dependent on receiving these funds, will that be acceptable? So I don't know, Tom, if you have any answers to that slightly tricky question.
Yeah, I'll give it my best stab, but I think it would be worth saying that we might need to take it offline and talk in more detail about the specific situation. The awards, like with most research funding awards, is made to the institution, not to the individual. But obviously it's dependent on the individual PI being at that institution. And one of the things that we wanted to try and avoid, if we could, was having to change institutions part way, because then of course you need to transfer all of the contracts and that might lead to delays in the project. So I think it really depends on how quickly that institution could put a contract in place with the PI and how strong their commitment to do that was. But I'd also kind of like to follow up individually to find out a bit more about that situation.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. A question, I think this one is for you, Anna, and the question is, are institutional overheads considered? Academic institutions take 15% of the total budget. I think you had that in your presentation, but it's worth emphasizing again. Anna?
Sure. Thanks, Isabella. So for the Africa-based costs, you are able to apply for up to 20% of the staff costs as overheads. So that would, so that's a maximum, but we will obviously consider anything kind of under that. But for the UK-based costs, we won't be funding any overheads.
Okay, thanks very much. We have a question here, which is, I guess it's for myself or for Simon, and the question is, we have been asked to address power imbalances in our research. Please suggest how we do this if the project is in biological or agricultural sciences and has to do with food production. So that's a very pertinent question. And I would say that we would ask you to think about the power imbalances in collaborations between yourselves and global northern institutions, if you have already experienced those, that you have been concerned with in the way collaborations unfold, in the way the data collection, the data analysis and so on is designed, in the way that publications are being planned in terms of authorship. What are the imbalances that you've come across or that you've experienced and that you feel concerned about and that you would like to redress in the way that you design your research project, whether it is in agriculture or biological sciences, or it is indeed in the social sciences or the arts or the humanities? That's one. Another element might be power imbalances, not strictly speaking in terms of the collaboration itself, but in terms of the broad agenda for research within which you might want to design your project. So is your research idea, are the priorities that you see for inquiry, do they fall outside of the development frame that we've got at the moment in terms of the SDGs? Do they speak to priorities that are not captured in these international frames? Then putting them forward and saying, well, these are priorities that we want to pursue because they're locally relevant or they're nationally relevant, even though they don't fit within global frames. That would be another way of doing it. But the emphasis here is really on the imbalances that you perceive and that you're concerned with and that you want to try and redress in the way you design your project. I'm just looking at another set of questions here. As an early career researcher or as an early career research PhD candidate, can I serve as a co-investigator and have a PI with a post-PhD qualification? Simon, I'm going to hand that to you.
Thanks, Isabella. I'm assuming that is from an African participant, and I would say yes. We want to have a principal investigator who's African. If the African team is more than just the principal investigator, and they want to work with an early career researcher at their institution or whatever, that's up to them to propose the structure for their partnership. So I don't see a problem with that in principle, but I'd be happy to speak to or answer that in more detail offline. But in principle, that seems okay to me.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Simon. There is a follow-up question to you, Anna, about the overheads. So the follow-up question is, concerning this 15% institutional charge, did you mean 20% of staff costs or 20% of the total? Because I think the person asking is suggesting that institutions typically take 15% of the total. So Anna, if you could clarify.
Sure. So the decision has been made to make overheads 20% of the staff costs. I believe this is so that we can fund as many projects as possible, with quite a limited budget. But it's definitely something that we might be able to look at for future calls to see if we could increase that overhead amount. But at the moment, it is 20% of the staff costs.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. There is a question here that I will take. I may have missed it. Is the project open to all areas or are there specific thematic areas? The answer is it's open to all areas. It's open to the areas that you, the applicants, think are priorities for you to investigate. So all areas are allowed. We haven't put any restrictions on the areas or the disciplines for that matter. I'll take another question. What does PARC consider as expected outputs of the research project? And again, I would say we have no predefined expectations of the research projects because it will very much, those will depend on the nature of the project, the nature of the research ideas that you want to pursue. However, we would expect that you prepare at least one academic publication, should ideally come out of this research collaboration or the research project. Not immediately, we know that these things take time, but plans for at least one academic publication is one output that we would expect from each of the research projects. There is a question here, there is a preference on capstone programs. Are you thus expecting to weigh more projects that cover capstone programs? And if so, out of the expected 3 to 5 projects, do you have a maximum number of funded projects in non-capstone programs? Thank you very much for that question. The answer is we do not have a preference for capstone programs. Yes, PARC is working to build programs of research and policy engagement across the 3 capstone areas, but we are very clear that this call really should be open to the priorities that you African scholars, institutions see for research. They don't have to have anything to do with the capstone programs, and we are aiming for as wide a spectrum of projects as possible. I hope that answers your question. Here's a question from Mark Isler from Bristol. Do the projects need to address power imbalances in research and dissemination equally, or could a project focus mainly on the imbalances in dissemination of knowledge already generated by an existing partnership? I think the answer is they do not have to be addressed equally. As I said, or as we said, the onus, the emphasis really is here on what are the power imbalances that the African applicant is really concerned with. What are the ones that they are most concerned with? And it's those that you will try and address and seek to address in your project. So there's no expectation that there should be an equal weight given to research and dissemination. I hope that answers the question. Here we have a question on the monitoring, evaluation and learning process that we would like to have as an underpinning for this call and for the research projects. And the question is, can you describe the MEL process that the lead investigator is required to participate in with PARC? I think that is a question, well, in the first instance for for Simon, I think, and then maybe handing over to Tom or Anna.
Well, I think the simple answer is we have in the guidance, it's quite right, said that we're asking for applicants to engage in a monitoring, evaluation, and learning process. And it's also something Isabella touched on in her talk. We haven't yet, frankly, worked through exactly what that process will be in terms of what we will lead from a PARC perspective. It may well involve bringing the award holders together as a cohort during their project and maybe afterwards. So I think the detail of that will be something that we will provide to award holders at the point that we make the award. Yeah, it's something we are working on at the moment.
Thank you very much, Simon. I don't think, is there anything that you would like to add to that? Or Anna?
No, thanks.
No, all right, okay. A question here perhaps to Simon. Is the submission of the partnership inquiry form mandatory even for those who might have already identified and contacted a potential collaborator?
No, that's a good question. No, it's not mandatory. It's just that we want to be sure that in order to give people the opportunity to make links with researchers at Bristol, that we offer the service ourselves to do that. People are welcome, as they might normally do, to contact people directly. That's fine. They're welcome to do that. The form is just there for those who want our help in brokering any partnerships.
Thank you, Simon. Here are a couple of questions for you, Anna or Tom. Maybe Anna first. What do you consider as in-kind contributions? Remember, we raised this in light of Evelyn's comments, but what would you consider as in-kind contributions from African institutions who might be applying?
So I would consider as in-kind contributions anything that you're not kind of costing, anything that you're kind of not asking for on the financial budget template, to make sure that you kind of include in in your application to say that this is what you're contributing over and above, what you're actually putting in the costing. So that could kind of be anything, whether it's financial or non-financial.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Another question, I guess that's also for you, Anna. Will the budget of the host applicant cover that of the Bristol partner?
So I believe that we'll be keeping the budgets separate. Sorry, Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, Anna, I'm in touch with that. Yeah, so that whatever you put in as a budget through yourselves as the African applicant, that total budget must cover your budget and the cost of the Bristol partner. So it's the total cost of the project. It's just that we will ask the Bristol applicants to complete a separate detailed costing, which is related to our internal costings process. So the detail of what is being asked for from Bristol will come out of that system, and that will form one of the attachments that goes into the overall application documents. So whatever you're requesting should cover the total budget. I don't think we touched on this actually, Tom, in our talk, but the process for distributing the funds that we've come up with, because we think it's probably the sort of the simplest and reduces the admin, is that at the point of award, we will retain the Bristol budget, part of the budget, and the budget for the African host and any other partners will go to the African host. So we're not transferring the money over to you and then you're not having to transfer it back to us. So that's the process we put in place.
Thank you very much, Simon. Another question, I think for you, Tom, or for you, Anna, I'm not quite sure. I think Tom first. In case of a delay by the host institution in executing the contract, would you consider an extension to the start of the research project?
I mean, firstly, one of the reasons why we've put the contract out now is to try and avoid any delays in executing the contract, because if there are any things that need to be negotiated, they can be brought up now rather than kind of waiting for an award. I'm not sure, Simon, are there any hard deadlines for the actual award period for this?
We are fortunate that this isn't government money. This is donations money, so we have a little bit of flexibility. I don't want to say that there is no deadline. My approach will be that at the point of award, we will meet Tom or someone from his team, myself, the award holder, someone from their support services, and we will agree a timeline for setting up the project. So we're aware that different institutions have different processes, so we're happy to engage and discuss what would be a reasonable timescale to complete. So I think we understand there will be delays at the same time, and we can be somewhat flexible. At the same time, we'd like to put in some indicative timescale for setting up the project.
Okay. Thank you very much, Simon. We have about just a couple of minutes left, but just 3 more questions we'll deal with very briefly. So can someone with an additional affiliation, such as a short-term teaching contract with a non-African higher education institution, also apply, provided that they have secured a contract and letter of support from the African host institution? Simon or Tom, who would like to take this?
I don't know the answer, Simon, so I'm looking to you.
It's a good question. I think it might be possible. I think I'd like to have a conversation offline directly to discuss that further. I don't want to rule it out.
Okay, All right, thank you. And then there are just two final questions that we'll take. The first is, would a government institution, such as the Ministry of Health, be acceptable as a host institution? So we have defined that this call should be for African higher education or research institutions as the host institution. So I think in this case, if the Ministry of Health were to partner with an African research or higher education institution, then this would be possible, this would be eligible. The other is, I could have missed this. Must an African university partner with a UK university? My concern is that in most cases, the relationship is asymmetrical. In terms of the areas of focus, if, for example, a research solely focuses on transitional justice in Kenya, would the UK researchers have to identify relevant issues affecting the UK? The answers to this are, first of all, for the purpose of this call, yes, the collaboration would have to be with a researcher at the University of Bristol, because we want to embed this different way of working in Bristol, starting at home. So that's the first. The second is, no, there is no expectation that there have to be similar issues or relevant issues that the Bristol partner identifies. If the focus that you propose is, as you say, on transitional justice in Kenya, then it's about identifying a collaborator who would be interested in participating in that research, perhaps with a focus on mutual learning and capacity strengthening around issues of transitional justice, for example. There's no expectation that there needs to be sort of a complementary issue to be explored in the UK. I hope that answers your question. And as we have come to the end of our time, I want to say that any questions that you still have about the call that you weren't able to post today, or that might arise in the course of you trying to complete the application form, please do share them with us. Maybe Simon, you can share your screen again and show the address that we want to use. So please do direct any inquiries that you have to the team at PARC-partnerships@bristol.ac.uk. We hope very much that this webinar has been useful to you. Thank you very much for your interest. Simon, you have a quick last thing to say?
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to reiterate that we will be creating an FAQ from this webinar.
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
If we haven't answered any questions, we will answer all of those in the FAQ and post that on the call page. And we'll also post a recording of the webinar on the call page. Thanks,
Okay.
Isabella.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, great. I'm sorry I omitted that. That's really important. Yes, we will do that. And so we'll hope that as we go along, all your queries or where there's lack of clarity will be clarified sufficiently. So it leaves me to just thank all the speakers, Simon, Tom, Anna, and Evelyn. Thank you very much for your inputs. Thank you all for your interest. And we look forward very much to receiving your applications. So bye for now. Bye-bye.